A Reading Life, hosted by Bart, Meehan and Rebecca Vassarotti. Today we're playing part 2 of our conversation with Canberra writer Freya Marske.
Not every book can be everything. I don't require a historical novel to stop short in the middle of a page and say, but don't worry, none of this money from these white aristocrats came from any slavery or any sugar plantations. I mean, you have to decide what fantasy you're buying into at a certain point. But I think historical fiction, it's always going to have bias in it, even if you're being... I'm sure even my books will reveal something about the biases that I have and the spots that I wasn't thinking about when I did my research and when I did my writing. And all you can do is read as widely as you can from as many different voices as you can. So historical fiction by traditionally underserved and underheard voices for me is very interesting because it makes me think about places and times either that I'd never thought about before or that I had thought about but not from that perspective. So one of my favourite historical fantasy series is by Zen Cho, who obviously read, like I did, a lot of Georgette Heyer sort of Regency froth romances, and then thought, okay, well, where are all the people of colour? Yeah. What were they doing? What was happening on the other side of the empire with a capital E? And wrote an amazing book called The Sorcerer to the Crown, where the two main characters are the first black royal magician and a half Indian gentleman's daughter who also wants to be a magician, and the way that their identities manifest in the world and the society. And fantastic read. Really good.
As a writer, you can't know how your reader 50 years from now is necessarily going to read you. It's a different world, the future. So
obviously you can't future-proof yourself by attempting to scurry around and write in guardrails about every possible reading of your work. All you can do is do the best you can with who you are and try and listen when people say, actually, here's something you could have done better.
Yes, exactly. Let's talk a little bit about your writing life, Freya. You're a practicing GP. You're the parent of a 9-month-old little girl, and you're the writer of several very good, complex, interesting novels. My question is, when do you sleep?
Well, the answer to how does it get written used to be, I work part-time and I don't have children. That one doesn't work anymore. And I will admit, yes, I had to take a good hard look at my contracts when I was going into the decision to have a kid and go, okay, when is the next book going to get written? Look, I'm very lucky. At the moment, I do have a lot of family support. But when I was writing the 4 books that are currently published, I didn't have a kid. And so things could get written in the scraps of time that I had around work. I found the early evening for me was a very good writing time. And so as long as I wasn't working completely full time, I had time to come home, do some exercise, make dinner, sit down with a gin and tonic and get some writing done. And also, because I wasn't working full time and because GP is a very flexible kind of medical job, I could work a morning, for example, come home and do some writing in the afternoon. So I've managed to cobble together a fairly flexible life, which is important to me because I get bored very easily. So I have 2 jobs that are both, a day and a half in the week. I have a couple of spare half days in the week to get life done or write. And then I used to have my evenings, and now I don't. Now I have a 9-month-old.
So you're still a fairly new parent. So have you worked out? Are you seeing how becoming a parent has that changed your writing?
So far, I think it's a little early to tell if it's going to be changing things in terms of thematically and what I want to examine. At the moment, I am writing a book that I began long before I even got pregnant, so I'm sort of finishing that one off. I'm sure and I've got a couple of ideas that I'm on contract for that, this is the way of being a writer, is you're always writing something that is due in 2 years, but you had the idea for, that's going to come out in 2 years, but you had the idea for it 2 years ago. And so I think the effect that being a parent will have on my writing, we'll probably see it in about 6 years or so on the shelves.
And in the flesh.
Yes, exactly. And obviously I think it would be impossible for it not to have changed the way that I see the world. It certainly changed the way I consume media. You know, used to be totally fine with these shows about terrible emergencies and medical problems, and now they're like, oh, a child has come in. I'm like, change the channel. There's certain things I can't read and watch anymore, but I'm not sure yet what kind of book ideas are going to come out of it. There's a great book that I read last year called The Last Hour Between Worlds, which is a fantasy novel, and it's about the main character goes to a cocktail party, I think when her kid is about 3 months old, I think, and it's her first night out from being a full-time parent, and of course things go terribly wrong and she has to stop the party from falling through magical dimensions and reconnect with her terrible ex and things like that. You know, wonderful, but it's just, you can tell that it was told in the voice of somebody who knew exactly what that was like, to have had your whole identity be temporarily subsumed in the identity of parenthood, and then to be taking your first steps out of that again. It's a great read.
I wonder, when your daughter is old enough, 3 or 4 years from now, and is demanding stories, whether you'll find yourself gravitating towards writing some children's stories.
I don't know. It's a good thought. I think a lot of authors do start writing for children because they're writing for their own children.
Or Tolkien, we spoke about before, used to write stories for his children and write them in letters and send them to them.
Yeah. Oh, look, and let's be honest, I'll probably end up inventing stories of one kind or another. But at the same time, there's so many wonderful books out there. I'm sure I'll never lack for stories to tell her that are, again, told in different voices and from different perspectives. So I definitely will be inventing stories for her. Whether that translates into attempting to cross into writing them down, we'll see.
Let's talk a little bit about your trilogy and your latest book. Rebecca, you were going to ask Freya some...
So you've got sort of 4 books that are published. One is the trilogy, and the latest one is Swordcrossed. But I understand the sequence in which you've written them is actually a little bit different to that. So it'd be useful to delve into where your writing life started in terms of published novels, and a little bit of the story about what happened, particularly with your first novel.
Yes, you're right. They are published out of the order in which they were written. So I wrote on and off since I was 5, 6, very little stories. Always thought, it would be nice to have a book published, but I think I never quite conceived of author as a career. Or if I did conceive of it, it was for something people who were much more serious about it than me, but I thought it would be nice to have a published book. That might be nice. And of course I was mostly writing fantasy on and off because I was reading mostly fantasy. Once I was in undergrad, and then when I went to medical school, I had less time, but by then I had discovered fan fiction. And the great thing about fan fiction is it can be very short, and you can just post it online, and you could make friends, and they comment and say, that was really great, can we have another chapter, or that was really nice, and it keeps you writing. And so of course I wasn't a wonderful writer when I began that, but it teaches you to finish things, and it teaches you to find community with people who will encourage you, and that you can make friends with other writers. And that kept me going, even though I was writing very little original fiction all the way through up to my graduation from medical school. And then obviously I was adjusting to work and still writing a little bit around the edges, and writing a few short stories because I thought that was probably the best way to do it. I was used to writing shorter things. And then realizing that, no, I was actually a long-form writer. Okay, let's see. I've got through my exams. Let's see how I go writing a novel. And I started writing a novel. It was an idea that I had a long time ago, and I was struggling with it. It wasn't quite gelling. And at the time, I was reading a lot of romance and thought, okay, what if I just put that one aside and write something that's just fun, that's the perfect mishmash of romance and some of the fantasy things that I like, just to prove to myself that I can get to the end of a full-length manuscript. And that will be proof of concept for me, and then I'll feel better, and then I can go back to this other more serious idea that I have. And the book that resulted from that was Swordcrossed. That was the first novel that I finished. And
which is your latest
latest published book.
book.
So it was my 4th published book. And so I wrote it, I edited it, I sent it to some trusted writer friends. They gave me feedback. I edited it some more. And at that stage, I had been made enough friends in the writing community online that I had friends who were published or about to be published, and they knew a bit about how the industry worked and could recommend to me, here's how you write a query letter, here are the kind of agents who are representing fantasy and romance, or that mushy genre space in the middle. And so I queried with Swordcrossed, and I got multiple offers from agents, and they were all very keen on it and said, this is a really great book, we really love it. Most of them said you will have to do some edits on it so that it is either more romance or more fantasy, because both of those are very big genre umbrellas. And as it stands at the moment, there's no magic in it. So it's not a very traditional fantasy. And there's a lot of gay sex, which is also not particularly very traditional fantasy. And then the romance people would say, well, it's not historical romance because it's not set in a real place. And it's not fantasy romance because there's no dragons and assassins and things like that. We're not quite sure what this is. And my agent was very upfront about that, and we sort of sent it off to some fantasy publishers and some romance publishers, slightly varying how we were pitching it both times. And all of them came back saying, we really like this author's writing. This is a really engaging book. We don't know where it fits on the shelf. It's not enough of one thing or the other. Has she got anything else? And by that stage, I was writing another book with that same combination of the things I loved, the queer romance, the fantasy, and my agent had sat me down and said, Freya, you have to decide which shelf this is going to live on before you start writing it, and then we'll have a bit more luck. So I said, okay, I want to be a fantasy writer. So I'll make it a fantasy series that's got strong romance arcs in it, and that way we can sell it as historical fantasy. Everybody knows what that is. There are plenty of books out there with magic, but set in our world at a certain time period. And so by the time we bounced off everybody with Swordcrossed, there were quite a few editors out there who liked my voice and were much interested in looking at something I had done that was much more easy to sell. Because at that stage, romantasy, the current fantasy and romance smushed together buzzword, which is quite hard to define because it is a publishing marketing term. You know, some books that are sold as romantasy are much more romance, some of them are much more fantasy. There are some elements of genre expectation as to what kind of story it's selling, whether it's YA, young adult, or whether it's adult. But at the time, romantasy wasn't a word, so we couldn't sell it. But we did manage to go back to one of the editors who had read Swordcrossed and enjoyed it and said, I would like to work with this author. And we said, okay, in the meantime, I had written the book that became A Marvelous Light, the first book in the trilogy. And they read that and said, yep, good, okay. We can sell this one. I was lucky enough to get a contract for 3 books because I said outright, this is a trilogy. It is something that historical romance does quite frequently, which is 3 romances, each with a different main couple, linked together by an overarching plot. And that's a very, very common format in a romance series. Less common in a fantasy series. I think there was quite a lot of surprise when the second book came out and it was not the same protagonists as in A Marvelous Light. And I just said, look, this is just the way that I want to do it. You know, you've got these 6 people who are all, by the third book, you really do have 6 protagonists. They're all involved. The fantasy plot starts in book 1 and just builds in book 2 and then builds and comes to a head in book 3. But you've also got a romance, capital R romance, you know, very heavy focus on the interiority, the characters, their relationship, how they come together, and they get a happy ending in book 1, book 2, and book 3. And so that trilogy then came out through Tor UK and through Tor.com in the US. And once that was all done and my contract was up, over those 3 years, romantasy had suddenly become a thing. And so the publishers turned around and said, hey, that book that you sent us ages ago, we know where that lives now. Can we have that? And I said, yes, here you go, which was great. It was lovely to feel that the book, there was nothing wrong with the book when it first went out. It was just that the market wasn't ready for it. And I think publishing is such a weird industry, and that there are people out there doing their very best to try and sell probably very good books that just luck, timing, what's popular, what's just broken out, what are publishers looking for? Are they trying to match something that was just out? You know, and you can't write to, if you look at the market and say, oh, vampires are big at the moment, everyone's publishing vampires. If you then try and write that, a year later you've got a vampire book, publishing is already looking around and being like, okay, what's next? What's the next big thing? Because if you try and sell it to them, it's not going to come out for 2 years, and by that stage you've missed the wave. It's all just about luck.
It's really interesting, though. I think it's interesting from a writer's perspective about creativity, you know, in terms of that, of really having to be bound by which shelf it sits on. And it is interesting that particularly as writers get more successful, those bounds potentially get loosened a little bit in terms of people being able to be more comfortable about backing the author rather than where, you know, how they can sell the product. Yeah.
Publishing is a fairly risk-averse industry, and I was lucky in that the editor who picked me up in the US and who took the chance on me and was my first champion was someone who really understood where I was coming from, and she could see, she's like, yes, there is a market for this overlap between fantasy and romance. I believe in it. Let's go. So, you know, I lucked into somebody who really could see the way that things were going. I think she couldn't really anticipate how big romantasy was going to be, but I think she was in a position where she could say, this is the kind of story that speaks to me. I think we can sell it. Let's go, which was great. And self-publishing and, you know, being an independent author has become much more of a big thing with the explosion of ebook publishing and things like Kindle and Kindle Unlimited, and unfortunately the chokehold that Amazon has on the market. But it has allowed for people who are writing things that maybe they can see that there's a market for, even if it's a small market. There's 200 people out there who I am writing the story of their heart, and it's the story of my heart, and I no longer have to persuade profit and loss statement in the budget department of a huge publishing house who's interested in making a profit that this is a story worth telling. I can just put it out there and it will find its audience. So I think some of the biggest risks being taken and some of the trends that are being set in publishing are happening in self-publishing 5-10 years before they're going to break into mainstream publishing, which now is turning around and looking at people and going, oh, you self-published this book and it broke out really big. Can we now buy the rights to publish it and see if we can get a piece of that pie?
Before you talked about the fact that you didn't ever think that being an author was sort of like a career that you could imagine. Has that changed now with the success that you've had?
To be absolutely honest, probably not.
Okay.
As a sole career,
Yeah.
I think, definitely it is a career of mine. I just happen to have multiple careers going in different directions. I don't know, trying to think if I know any of my writer friends who only make their money from writing. I think a couple of them do, but they supplement it with, they teach workshops, teach courses. They are constantly doing the hustle with a capital H to try and make enough money as an author. Being able to make a living just on books is something that only a very rarefied, lucky few authors, I think across any genre, can do these days. So for me, it would be ideal if I could see a future where I can completely support myself through writing. But at the same time, I think there is something about the security of knowing that I have a flexible, well-paying, guaranteed job. They're always going to need GPs. It pays reasonably well. And I can pick and choose my hours. There is something about that frees up a certain amount of creativity for me because it takes the stress away. I think if I was constantly having to hop from contract to contract, especially in today's world of publishing where you might get a contract for 3 books, and then if that hadn't sold very well, they would have turned around and been like, oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, we don't want any more from you. And that would be it. And at the moment I'm midway through my second contract. And again, there's no guarantee that I'll get picked up for another contract by the same publisher, or even if I do, that it will be for the same amount of money. It might be for less because they haven't made as much off me as they want. And it's all just stumbling from contract to contract to contract, unless you become one of those people whose name is just so good that now you're a guarantee for your publisher, and they're very invested in keeping you and following you wherever you go.
Or Netflix decides to buy the movie rights.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think even that it's probably a one-off payment, but there's no guarantee that you're going to see residuals. And I think even actors these days don't see very good residuals from streaming. I think it's a completely the model of TV and film is, in terms of who gets the money, has really not swung in the direction of paying out the creatives. And so I think obviously it would be wonderful if Netflix or anybody picked up any of my books, but I wouldn't expect to see a long-term tail from that. I would expect it to be a payout for the rights and that would probably be it.
And potentially name recognition. That
A name
suddenly-
oh, of course, no.
yes,
You know,
yes.
it would be reselling the trilogy with the photos of the
Exactly,
actors on the
that's
front
right.
and saying, now a hit Netflix show. Oh, I would never turn my nose up at it, of course.
the Bridgerton effect.
The Bridget, if only. Well, I mean, we were all hoping, those of us who are working in the romance space, that the Bridgerton effect would lead to some more adaptations. There's so much amazing historical romance, contemporary romance out there. Bridgerton was so huge, it showed that there is an audience for romance stories, but it seems to have just gone nowhere. It's very depressing.
Yeah. You said that when you sold the trilogy to your publisher, you made the point that it was a trilogy. You had 3 books in it. I'm interested from a technical perspective how a writer constructs a trilogy. I mean, that's quite an enormous commitment, 3 books. Did you have essentially the 3 books roughly plotted out in your mind before you started?
Before I started writing, no. By the time we got to the stage of me selling A Marvellous Light, I had come up with concepts for books 2 and 3. I'm a bit of a discovery writer, not in terms of plot, but in terms of putting things out there on the page. So I come up with an outline for a plot. I sort of know who my 2 main characters are, but a lot of what ended up playing a very big role in the plot, the world building, was things that I discovered through writing the first book and then through writing the second book. And by the time I hit the third book, I had a lot of pieces that I'd given myself that I could decide which of these I was going to use. And I think book 2, I did have to outline quite, because it follows the murder mystery structure a little bit more than book 1 does, and even book 3 is not really a murder mystery at all. But book 2 is a very classic homage to a locked room, or rather locked boat murder mystery. And I had a great time coming up with, how they're going to find clues, what kind of shenanigans they're going to get up to on this ocean liner, because I had a very set time period. The voyage from here to here takes this many days. They're going to uncover these secrets. Here are some people who can be involved in the plot. And so that was a lot of fun. But it did mean that I then had to decide, okay, for example, the main characters in book 3, you meet them on page in book 2. Because I knew that by the time I hit book 3, I would have to wrap up this big conspiracy magical plot that I had going. I didn't have time for my 2 main characters to meet for the first time and for me to introduce one of them to the whole magical world. So book 1 is very much an introduction. One of the main characters is a magician. The other one, Robin, accidentally gets named liaison to the magical society, and so we learn about the society through his eyes, and that's very good trick for introducing world building. By the time we hit book 2, one of the main characters again is a magician. The other one is Robin's sister Maud, who is introduced to magic in book 1, so I don't have to go through the whole "oh my goodness, magic exists" thing again. And in book 2 you meet Lord Hawthorne and Alan Ross, and they meet each other crucially, and the first quarter of their romance happens in A Restless Truth, so that by the time I hit book 3, I could just be like, everyone knows who everyone is. These 2 people are in the full-on enemies stage of enemies to lovers, and we can just hit the ground running and go, because I had a lot more moving pieces to juggle with book 3. I knew more or less what was going to happen, but on the fine level of the actual plot events, the intricacies of how the characters would interact, I liked discovering that as I wrote.
Yeah.
Editing in a trilogy would be incredibly important, because you don't want contradictions
Yes.
in book 3 that contradict something in book 1. Are you a good self-editor, or do you rely on your publishing editor?
I write fairly clean first drafts. So because I do a lot of planning, and because I'm not a very fast writer, by the time I got to the end of a first draft of all of them, I was fairly sure I was quite consistent. So
how long does a book take you to write?
Depends on the genre. I would say on average about 9 months. I think all of the 3, each of those took about 9 months. Yes, I make a lot of jokes about gestating
Yes,
books.
that's right. And they are your first children.
My first children, yep, the elder siblings of my poor current 9-month-old. Yeah, it's probably about 9 months, and of that, I'd say at least the first month would be outlining. Yeah, it depends. The book that I've just finished took me much longer than that, because I started it, got sick, couldn't write, got pregnant, couldn't write, felt a bit better, wrote frantically, had a kid, couldn't write, and then had to power through the last 40,000 words of it in a sleep-deprived haze, basically. So it was not a clean draft by the time it was done, and it was a much more plotty and complicated book than any of I've done so far. It's got 5 point-of-view characters. It also has a murder mystery. It was set in a completely new world. It was a bit of a mess. So I've since received a lovely 9-page letter from my editor and a 15-page letter from my agent, who's also quite editorially involved, politely suggesting ways in which it can be improved in the edit. So that's my next thing to dive into.
Can I ask about writing a trilogy? And, like particularly when you're doing the world building and you're with this world for a long time, how do you feel when you finish it? Like often at the end of a great book, I kind of mourn the characters and I take a while. It's like, if I really love it, I'll even take a while to go into a new book because I just feel sad that the last one is finished. When you've sort of created a whole world and brought these characters to life, do you have a sense of sadness when it's over?
Not really. I think I was really, because I was writing romances as well, I was happy that I left them happy.
Okay.
And
fair enough.
book 3, has this short little final chapter, which is sort of like the epilogue scene where you get to get a glimpse of where they're going in life. So from my perspective, I put these characters through a lot and I had brought them out the other end and said, here you go, here's your happiness, here's the rest of your lives. It is set in 1909. I had to make one concession towards, I believe that you put your books out there and then they belong to the reader now. The readers can decide what happens, what they want to happen to the characters afterwards. This is the fan fiction writer in me speaking. Yes. But I did say, look, if it helps at all, I will tell you that none of them die in World War One. Given that we've got this group of young people, 4 of whom are young men on the verge of coming into World War One. If it helps, none of them die. But I felt that I'd left them in a good place. I had spent a long time with them by that stage. The writing, the editing, the writing, the marketing, the writing the next one. And I was ready. I was full of ideas for other things. I was ready to move on to new characters and new worlds after spending that much time with them. Obviously some people spend much longer and get much more in-depth. But I think it was time. I was really pleased with myself. I'd never really thought that I'd start with a trilogy. I thought, we'll just start with a standalone book. That was what Swordcrossed was for. But I'm really proud of it as it stands, as standalone books and as a linked trilogy. It was a really good challenge for myself. It definitely made me grow as a writer through it. And so I think by the end of it, I just felt really pleased and proud, but I was ready for the next thing.
Yeah, fantastic.
Well, Freya, thank you very much for spending some time today with us at ArtSound. It's been fascinating to talk to you about both reading and writing, and we encourage all of our listeners to go out and find books by Freya Marske. The latest is Swordcrossed. And, of course, the trilogy, the Last Binding trilogy.
Yes, and you said this might be coming out around September or so.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, so in October I have a novella coming out. So I managed to write a short novel.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, it was short by the time we got through editing it. It's called Cinder House, and it is a fairy tale retelling. It's a version of Cinderella, where Cinderella is a very angry ghost trapped in a house.
That's very interesting. I think she's an American writer, T.J. Klune, recently did something similar with a novella, which was, like you, at some point nominated for a Hugo Award. So who knows? Maybe that's on the the horizon for you.
Look, I won't lie. I did look at what the Hugo cutoff for a novella word count was, and made sure that mine slid in just underneath that, just in case. But it was a very good challenge to try and get a whole story out in 40,000 words instead of 140,000 words.
Well, of course, the trilogy, the Last Binding trilogy, was actually nominated for a Hugo as well, wasn't it?
For Best Series. Yeah.
Well, again, thank you very much for taking time with Rebecca and I on ArtSound, A Reading Life. And we look forward to reading much of your work into the future.
Oh, thank you very much. Look, I'll take any excuse to ramble on about books.
That was our conversation with Canberra writer Freya Marske. Tune in next week for more fantastic conversations with Canberra writers. You've been listening to A Reading Life, produced by ArtSound FM, Canberra's best community station.